Good evening, Brigade. Tonight's Forrestal lecture features Admiral Michael G. Mullen. Most notably known as the 28th Chief of Naval Operations, the 17th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Chairman when we killed bin Laden, Admiral Mullen was a surface warfare officer who commanded 3 U.S. Navy ships, Cruiser Destroyer Group 2, the George Washington Battle Group, and the U.S. Second Fleet. He teaches NL 485, steering the naval service through ethical shoals, to first-class midshipmen in the fall semesters, a class consistently in high demand. He inspires and empowers his students in every lesson, leaving a lasting impression on their outlooks. It is unanimous among his former students that he is never afraid to stand up for what is right. They assert that he is not one to criticize or insert his educated opinion, but when he does, the impact is colossal. Admiral Mullen spearheaded the elimination of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, ushering for the first time in U.S. military history the open service of non-heterosexual service members. Since his retirement from the U.S. Navy, Admiral Mullen joined the boards of General Motors, Sprint, and Bloomberg Philanthropies, actively dedicated to improving the growth, development, recovery, and transition of military veterans and their families. Please join me in welcoming Admiral Mullen tonight.
Thanks, Midshipman Pock. It's really great to be with you and the entire brigade. It's always a special privilege to speak to this group. I'd like to say to Midshipman Pack and her team, thanks for stepping up, leading this conference, as it is about leadership, which is a critical capability that we all need to both have and work on. Hopefully, I'll be able to, in the next few minutes, impart some pearls of wisdom that I picked up over the years. It's an extraordinary time. I'm actually coming to you from an undisclosed and remote location I'm unable to reveal. And I've been in this undisclosed and remote location for, well, literally since the 13th of March. And in that regard, I know it's been a challenging year for all of you. I want to commend the leadership, Admiral Buck, Captain Buchanan at the Naval Academy, for walking this institution day by day through an incredibly challenging last year. And I'm actually hopeful that in the next few months, we'll start to see these dark clouds that have been on the horizon for so long start to lift. And that by mid-year and maybe towards the fall, we will be, not just as an institution, but as a country, in much better shape with respect to this pandemic, so we can move ahead. I was advised by a recent graduate that if you don't, tell a good joke and get their attention, get the mid's attention through humor in the first 30 seconds, you're toast. Well, I'm already beyond the 30 seconds, and I've never been a great joke teller. So I hope I'm actually not toast and that you'll listen to what I have to say. I know that the conference itself is focused on developing a winning culture. What does that mean? With respect to culture, sometimes we can get lost on the complexity of culture. And in my view, I think there's a way to boil it down consistent with that age-old rule of KISS and keeping it simple. Actually, I believe culture is sort of the summation or the accumulation of the behaviors of individuals in a unit, in an organization. And that individuals in these organizations are actually, each and every one of them, are a culmination of their beliefs and how they act with respect to their own beliefs. And as you integrate these together, you create a culture, a good culture or a bad culture. And I've seen both. And in its simplest form, that's kind of how I look at it. When I talk about beliefs, and this is one of the things that we go through in the class that I teach, is not, years ago, I wrote down what I believed in, and I won't go through all of those. But some of them are, I'm someone that trusts people. I depend on people. I believe in diversity. I believe in civilian control of the military. I believe in our sailors and Marines, soldiers, airmen, Coast Guardsmen. I believe in leaders, and I believe our past is very instructive. And I'll come back to the past piece of this in a few minutes. I believe in balance. My list is much longer than that, but what I would encourage you to do is take a few moments at some point in time and write down what you believe in and spend some additional time reflecting on what you believe in. I think you'd find it very instructive. And while I'm talking about writing things down, I've spoken with young people in the last 10 to 15 years and encouraged young people to journal because we're living in a historic time. We're in the middle of history. Sometimes it's hard to know that. But I think if you do that and do it consistently, years from now, you'll look back and marvel at what you were living through and the specifics of it in terms of what was really going on. So I'd really encourage you to try to do that. Okay, so what about culture? I mean, one of the ways I think about this is you have to build a foundation. And I want to talk about 4 corners of a really solid foundation, on top of which you can put yourself individually, or you could put an institution or an entity and really figure out what the culture is. And I think the first one, and I don't think any of these will be a surprise, but the first and most important corner, the lodestone of a great culture is, and a great foundation, is integrity. And those of you who are listening that are obviously midshipmen here and graduates know that that's something that we focus on the entire time that we are mids, and hopefully for the rest of our life. My own journey on integrity really started at home. And actually, it was pretty spotty as a teenager, if I'm honest with you. But when I got here, when I got to the Naval Academy, it really, really took hold of me. And I struggled with it on occasion. I wavered with it on occasion. But the institution really allowed me to, 1, understand it, and 2, grow with it. So that over the time that I was here, the 4 years, it became, a singular focus and a part of my life, literally without thinking. Admiral Jim Stockdale talked about his plebe year, and actually said that it was his plebe year that allowed him to get through the prison camps in Vietnam. Literally, it's that for me, that issue of integrity that allowed me to get through the Naval Academy and take it with me, and was a centerpiece for doing the right thing. Just one brief story. I didn't get off to a very good start. My first class year, I was down in early October in my locker, and I hear and it was open, and I was changing out uniforms from the summer to the fall, and I was reaching in and out, and I hear this voice of God over my shoulder, and actually the voice of God turned out to be the assistant officer of the deck, and he asked me, "What's in those 2 bottles?" And I looked at them, having forgotten that they were there, and immediately told him it was, I thought, an unauthorized liquid. And that didn't get me off to a great start first year. But it was because I actually there was never a doubt about what I would say and that I would own up to it. And in fact, that then resulted in a major offense. And back then you accumulated demerits. And literally, I had 115 demerits within a month of the beginning of my first class year. And at that point in time, if you got 150, usually you got the boot. I graduated, as I say, in the top of the bottom third of my class, and I'm not proud of that. I had a good time as a mid, obviously. I didn't work as hard as I could have, but as I look back, I wish I'd worked a whole lot harder than I did. And that is a regret. But with other regrets, I would just ask you to think about, our conduct, our behavior, what we do with our lives. And one of the things that Stockdale talks about in his time in prison is not doing anything that would stain your soul for the rest of your life. And that really struck me as something that we need to hold close to us, hold close to ourselves, particularly on this issue of integrity. Fast forward from when I was a midshipman and had that challenge my last year to the testimony that I gave in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee on Don't Ask, Don't Tell in about a little over 10 years ago. And that testimony actually was centered on the whole issue of integrity. And how could we as a service, as a military, ask young men and women to wear the uniform, serve their country, and in too many cases, tragically die for their country, while at the same time coming to work every single day, having to lie about who they were. And that issue, issue of integrity fundamentally changed the terms of reference of the discussion and created a momentum which eventually allowed us to get through that issue to change the law, which has affected so many people in such a positive way. And it was focusing on that truth telling. And one of the things I worry about in the times that we're living right now is oftentimes, the truth has gotten muddled. It should never be so for any of us with integrity, at the center of who we are and in that corner of that foundation. The second corner I'd like to talk about is that of accountability. Again, something that you hear a lot about while you are midshipman and discuss and learn. And I know that it's a priority in the leadership curriculum, but sometimes I think we may have confused you on, who is accountable and why wasn't somebody held accountable. I'm a very proud surface warfare officer. I learned to love going to sea early. I was fortunate to have command as a young lieutenant, and you learn pretty quickly that the captain of the ship is accountable for everything. That's everything. Your entire crew, their behaviors, what happens on the mission, what happens in everything that you do. And it may be best summed up by, if you're the captain of the ship and it goes aground, you can expect, you don't have much of a future. There are exceptions to that. Admirals Nimitz and Borda, both of whom grounded their ships when they were young, both became CNOs, but I don't recommend that. It's not a good strategy. And for most, if you go aground, you don't have much of a future. I had early in my command tour as a lieutenant, the unfortunate incident of colliding with one of the buoys down in Thimble Shoals Channel in the Norfolk Channel. And essentially what I thought was, that would end my career. And it didn't, fortunately, but it generated a fitness report, which essentially was a message that you don't have much of a future. I'd call it an F if A was as high as you could get. It took me 11 years to actually return from a career standpoint to get back to being competitive and getting my next command. And it was quite a lesson. I worry about, what you've learned about accountability. For instance, in the much publicized, alleged war crimes of Chief Gallagher, have we taught you the wrong lesson? That somehow war crimes are okay and you can get away with it. I worry about the collisions of the DDGs Fitzgerald and McCain, where fundamentally we killed 17 sailors and in my community. And I spent a lot of time at sea, and I know what it takes to not do that. And I worry a great deal about the standards that had slipped, that had gotten us to that point, and quite frankly, whether the commanding officers were truly held accountable. And even last year, the whole mess on the Theodore Roosevelt, what was right? How did we hold the CO accountable? Did we hold others accountable, and should we have? And when I talk about accountability, there's two kinds. There's the individual accountability. You should always focus on that, and you should always be strong on that and hold yourself accountable. But there's also institutional accountability, whether it's the ship or the Naval Academy or the Navy or the Marine Corps, or quite frankly, the country. My own background goes back, to a couple major scandals that we had in the Navy, one in the early 90s called Tailhook. And one of my beliefs was there weren't enough senior officers who stood up in front and took a bullet for the aviation community as a way of accounting for, all the horrific actions that occurred at that event. And not doing that, the other thing that happens is it drags out recovery, if you will, from an incident like that extensively. And that certainly happened. It took us the better part of a decade to get through the Tailhook scandal. And actually, there's still lingering echoes of that, obviously, or I wouldn't bring that up. Roughly about the same time, there's a huge cheating scandal here at the Naval Academy. And it's the same question: who was held accountable? And it gets quickly beyond the individuals to the institution. And both for the Navy and the Naval Academy in those times, I had great worries. I was basically a captain in the Navy, but I had great worries about the health of these institutions that I held so dearly. And what we've been through as a country in the last couple of years, actually the last decade, in your lives, you've seen two recessions, two massive recessions, and you've seen this pandemic. And yet, as a country, who's accountable? We seem to pass the buck. Mostly that happens politically, but we have very few that stand up. So what have we learned about that? And what have you learned about that? And are you learning the wrong lessons? I would hope not. I would hope that you would think, talk, study, compare views on what accountability really means. It is heart and soul for us, for those of us who wear the uniform. And I worry that if this blur seeps into this culture that we're talking about, it won't be winning culture. It'll be a losing culture. The last part of that I'd like to talk about it. It's a story that at least affected me greatly. And some of you may know that, one of our superintendents here was Admiral Bill Lawrence. And Lawrence was the #2 guy. He was the XO for Stockdale and the prison camps. So he basically was the one that ran the discipline. And when he died, Senator McCain came along with 22 of his former POW colleagues to the chapel. And when Senator McCain got up and gave the eulogy, 23 POWs stood in the sacristy of that chapel. And that message about Admiral Lawrence and what he did for them and how accountable he was. Disciplined, yes. He led them, yes. But how accountable he was and he made them was an extraordinary message. So you want a winning culture, have an accountable culture. The third cornerstone of this foundation is competence. We've encouraged all of you, you have to learn your business. You have to be a great aviator. You have to be a great SWO. You got to be a great Marine. You got to be a great submariner. You got to be great in cyber. I'm sure I'll leave somebody out, and I don't mean to do that intentionally, but you need to be great in your profession. You need to be the best, or certainly shooting for the best. Back when I was a first class, sort of totally out of the blue, not very far from where all you were sitting, there I was out on YP classes. And the young lieutenant who was running the YP asked me to make a landing. I made a perfect landing on the seawall, never having done that before. I got so thrilled. That so struck me in a way that I just never imagined. The skills just sort of came out. and I happened to hit it right. That was the beginning for me of falling in love with going to sea. And it's still, even as I became a SWO and spent many months and years at sea, it was that skill, that ship handling skill, that seaman's eye, that actually someone, young lieutenant, pulled out of me at a critical moment. And in that regard, as I said, I loved going to sea. We trained hard whenever we went to sea. And I talk about this in the class I teach. We're in a dangerous business. One of the things I worry about when all things seem to be going well, I'm turning around looking for where that 4x4 is coming to basically lop my head off, because it is a dangerous business. And I never want you to sort of be sitting back. I always want you to be a little bit on edge. And I can tell you my career was saved more than once by a bright young junior officer of the deck or officer of the deck, a young JG or lieutenant, who called me to the bridge in the dead of night, and I didn't get there fast enough, and had the sense, because of his training and instincts, to turn to starboard rather than port and actually avoid my ship getting cut in half and the possibility of losing sailors. So when you talk about a winning culture, you've really got to be good at what you do. There's a lot of factors that go in that, but part of that for each and every one of us is for us to be the absolute best that we can possibly be. And that will come with taking some risk. There's also a mentorship part of this. People that pull you in under their wing, if you will, and two officers you would never know, but one of them was the bad officer when I was stationed there as a company officer in the mid-70s, a commander by the name of Peter Abbott, wonderful human being, surface warfare officer that had command. He taught me in a couple of years more about risk than anybody that I know. And I kept that risk profile that he taught me and integrated it into my professional competence, if you will. And it really made a huge difference, in my ability to achieve as a surface warfare officer. And the other was a lieutenant commander, actually, my CO on my second ship, by the name of George Sullivan. And he made going to sea more fun than you could possibly ever imagine. So it can be fun. You can take risks, but you got to be really good at what you're doing. So that third corner, if you will, of that foundation is really professional competence. And then lastly, and those of you who've heard me before know this, that last corner, it's all about leadership. One of the things that, I'm paying you, I'm not paying anybody anymore, but I used to, but one of the things I'm paying anybody that's wearing khakis, whether it's a chief or an officer, is to lead at every level. Yes, you've got to be really good in your area. You're technically good in your part of the profession, but more than anything else, I need you to lead. I need you to learn leadership. And I need you to focus in that regard, focus on your weaknesses. Young people have asked me for years, well, how do you get ready for the future? My only answer to that is, you take the toughest jobs you possibly can, because it is going to be tough out there, and achieving and learning through those jobs will prepare you for the future jobs. There's just no question about that. I also, in what can be a pretty confused world right now, given what's going on in the country and in the world, and this is the world you're going to be out in, all of you, within 3 or 4 years, leading, is how do you think about decisions? How do you think about behaviors? How do you frame it, if you will? And I've encouraged many people to create a framework in which they both behave, that they use to drive their behavior and to drive their decisions. And that framework is one of values, and their values, and this isn't all of them, but values like integrity, accountability, equality, human dignity, rule of law, freedom, diversity, respect, sovereignty, national security. There are more. And alongside that group of values are principles that you live by. One of them, and it's particularly important this month, in Black History Month is to see a situation from someone else's eyes, listen to them, try to understand their lived experience, if you will. And again, I'm talking principles. So through others' eyes, delegate, which I do, understand the history. And we're not very good in history in Americans. And Stockdale says, and I believe this, we are our brothers and sisters' keeper. Take care of each other. Understand culture. Be empathetic. Lead from the front. Bias for action. You know, be out there. Be present. Don't get stuck behind your desk or in your, in your cubicle, or in your room. Be out with the troops. Learn them. Make sure you depend on the team, not an individual. Be humble, balanced, patient, calm. In fact, the worse it gets, the calmer you should be. Be apolitical. Take calculated risk. Recognize there is such a thing as the fog of war. Not going to go away. You're going to be in it. How do you clear it is the question. And that you will, as I did, have failures. It's the principle is not the failure. You shouldn't seek that. But when we fail, the principle is get back on the horse, learn the lessons, and move forward. Two individuals that taught me as much as anything about leadership, back to when I was a company officer, was a superintendent, a guy named Admiral Kennard McKee, and the commandant, a guy named Jim Winnefeld. Extraordinary people. And the reason I bring them up is we all need mentors and we all need examples. So who are your examples? Who do you look up to? Who do you study? Who do you try to emulate? All of us should have that. And I've been blessed throughout my career to work for and around some remarkably good people. Lastly, I'd just like to say, so that's sort of that's the cornerstone four. So the four cornerstones of this foundation upon which you can put yourself and measure yourself, or you can put your institution with respect to culture, are integrity, accountability, competence, and leadership. This is Black History Month, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say something, quite frankly, especially this year. Part of it is, I already said, study history. These are historic times. What we've been through in the last year is a real inflection point. I always ask people who are interested or focused on leadership to listen, learn, and lead in that order. And I would encourage you, if you haven't had a chance, to pull down the 5-minute video of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the new Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, who talks about his lived experience. I would encourage you to pull down the 40-page document that recent graduates from West Point, classes of 18 and 19, put together courageously, and they're now active duty in the Army, put together and sent to the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Superintendent about racism at West Point, an institute they clearly loved and wanted to make sure they got it right for the future. My own experience in race goes back to the 70s. We had a CNO that turned us upside down in the early 70s by the name of Zumwalt. What I remember most from that were the tough, uncomfortable conversations and how little I knew. I'm sort of back there again, because when I talk about history with respect to racism, it goes back 400 years. Not 50 years or 60 years in my life, or back to the Civil War. It's been there a long time. And until we understand that in its depth, we're not going to understand how we move forward. There is, as far as I'm concerned, zero tolerance for racism. And as I speak to that, there should be zero tolerance for sexism. And there should be zero tolerance for any white supremacy behavior. You're going to believe, and I'm greatly encouraged. I've taught 2 classes here at the Naval Academy in the last 2 years. Extraordinary young men and women. We tell you that all the time, but trust me, you are. The expectations for you are very high. Dig in on this foundation, dig in on the issues that I've highlighted, and you will be ready as the class of 20 was, 21 is, and 22, 3 and 4 will be as well. So, but it won't just happen. You're really going to have to work at it. So those are some thoughts from somebody that's been around the block. I wish you the best. And Alexis, I'd be happy to take a few questions if you would facilitate it.
Sir, we have a question from one of our external delegates. From Nairi Brown, a cadet in the Virginia Corps of Cadets. How can I focus my energy on getting at best at what I do personally when it seems that the pressure to meet others' standards overrides working on personal growth?
Well, I think it depends on what standards you're talking about. I mean, for us, for you to, as you become commissioned, the standards that we live up to or should be living up to as an officer are pretty clear. And I think if you certainly keep those in front and then continue to develop personally, I mean, as a young officer, there's every expectation, no matter what branch of service, quite frankly, that you will become good in your MOS or in your specific designator, depending on the service. And there's time to do that, and there's focus on this, and there's an expectation that you will do that and get qualified. But you also do that, within a service or within a unit where you are expected to do other things. And the challenges are in that regard are huge. But I think you have the underpinning, you have the discipline and the learning to be able to do that. I want you to be positive that you will land on your feet and be able to do and answer that question actually that you just described. I think you'll be able to do both.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we have another question from an external delegate. From Midshipman First Class Grant Newton, United States Merchant Marine Academy. How can a leader provide empathetic support for a subordinate who has been through an emotional experience, such as loss of a loved one, family tension, while still encouraging them to continue their normal responsibilities without decreasing the standard they are held to?
Well, I don't think you ever have to decrease the standard. I mean, that question comes at, for me anyway, in the last decade of my service, which was 2001, post 9/11, for 10 years, the number of families who went through tragedies, the number of losses that we had, the number of funerals that we attended was extraordinary. And it's from my perspective as a leader, it's a fundamental requirement that you're there in support. You cannot, you captured the right word. You need to be empathetic. You cannot not having experienced what they've gone through. You can't really fully understand what they're going through, but being there is a huge part of that. And everybody has to go through that grief. And from my perspective, a leader needs to allow an individual or a family to work through that grief with some expectation down the road that life will get back to some version of normal. And you help them in both phases of that, getting through the grief process and then making sure they get back on their feet to be able to continue to do their job and grow despite that loss. And I'd say key to that more than anything else is going to be, empathetic support as well as just being there for them.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we have another question from Midshipman Second Class Tristan Walker from the Maine Maritime Academy. He said, I found your comments on zero tolerance very powerful. While I know there are many who agree with your stances against racism and sexism, how would you approach a sailor who did not agree with you on those issues?
And let me, if I can, Tristan, let me just extend that to the white supremacy piece as well. It's just, from a standard standpoint, it needs to be in every single command known that it is not tolerated, first of all. Secondly, when someone crosses that line, the discipline and first of all, the expectation is zero tolerance means, from my perspective, you have no future in this outfit. And then when that happens, to make sure that that's exactly what happens, that the discipline expectation is clear and that the discipline execution is clear. If you muddle that up, or if you go weak on that, then the expectations change. We have struggled as a country and as a military with all of these issues. I was actually somewhat stunned at the numbers that I hear who have white supremacy tendencies, if you will, that were, one, on the Hill, on the Capitol on January 6th, and two, that are out there. And it's, the number I hear is 15 to 20%. That has to be zero. And individuals who are that way, racist, sexist, white supremacists, they need to make a conscious decision to do something else with their lives. They can't be here. Now, I say that, and you just can't magically make them go away. But the policies need to be clear. The policies need to be executed very clearly, and over time, I think we can make progress here, first of all. Secondly, on the issue of actually, it's not just that. It's not just white supremacy, but on all three of those issues, there's a lot of intelligence, at the junior levels, if you will, of our outfits. The troops know who the white supremacists are. Now, that's easy to say. How do you get at that? That's another question. And leaders have to figure out a way to do that. But you need to. It needs to be zero tolerance. It needs to be very clearly articulated. And when the rules are broken, the hammer really needs to come down.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, Midshipman Second Class Maya Duncan from 6th Company. I really appreciate you bringing up the racial tensions that we have in this country and even in our military. I think the conversation is very difficult to have. So do you have any advice for people that have questions, or even people that would like to educate another? Like, any examples of people, like officers in the fleet, that have successfully addressed racial tensions?
It's a great question, and it goes back to what I said. If we're going to get through this, if we're going to actually make progress, these conversations have to be uncomfortable, and people have to be willing to risk, having that conversation. If you've looked at that video from General Brown, that's a very uncomfortable video to look at. Obviously, if you look at what happened, the tragedy of George Floyd, any human being, any American that would look at that and not say, we've got work to do here, isn't, from my perspective, isn't living in the reality. But this isn't going to happen overnight. The longer we stay away from this, the more difficult it is going to be. It's one of the things that I think about leadership is tough problems that are facing you don't go away. If you walk away from them temporarily, when you turn around and, first of all, it follows you. And when you turn around and stare it down the next time, it's bigger, it's worse. So you need to tackle them up front. And you need, and there's two thoughts. One is for you and your classmates or whoever that would like to have these conversations, you need to see if there is a comfortable environment in which to start to have the conversation. Secondly, and this goes back to the most uncomfortable conversations I had, as a JG when in 1970, when Zumwalt, the CNO, again, sort of turned us upside down. But there are facilitators that understand this, that can help us get at these issues literally from the majority and the minority side. But we have to take the step. And I talked about taking calculated risk on tough issues. We have to take calculated risk there. And if you don't do it here, in this environment, just because you are here and now, if we don't do it based on this inflection point, it's only going to get worse down the road. And these are challenges that you will face, which are more significant in the fleet or in the Corps, and that much more difficult to deal with. The other thing you get by doing it here is you start to train yourself on how to do this and learn. And this is, more than anything else, this is a learning environment. So I would encourage you to, to step up where you can.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, sir. Midshipman Sen, Class Carlos Perez, First Company. Sir, you yourself have given numerous years of service to the nation in many roles. You've kind of highlighted at some of your accomplishments. Sir, what has kept you going, doing all those years of service, as well as what is your greatest accomplishment?
Well, I talked about making that landing as a first class. I'm telling you, when I graduated, got on a destroyer out on the West Coast. A year later, I was off the coast of Vietnam. I mean, the Navy, I was so blessed because the Navy gave me great responsibility, early leadership challenges. I saw the world. It just opened up in front of my eyes. In the Asia Pacific, when I was an ensign or a JG, and it allowed me to grow. That, just that first tour I had that at every level. I mean, the Navy kept giving me challenging tours. But it also goes back to the first day I showed up as a plebe. I came from California, LA. I had no background whatsoever in the military. But I showed up here and I'd never been east, never been to Annapolis to take a look. But I can remember showing up and I've got over 1,000 classmates all going through the same thing. And they were extraordinary. Then it was all men, extraordinary young men from all over the country with lots of different backgrounds, exciting stories and places to talk about. And again, it just sort of opened the world up from that day, which was June of 1964, until 2011, when I walked out on the 1st of October. That always great people. They kept me going. It was easy to stay with it. And yes, certainly to serve the country. And yes, to try to make a difference. And that grew on me or grew with me over time. Honestly, if I had commanded 3 ships, made captain in the Navy, and the Navy had said, "You have no future," I would have saluted, said, "Thank you very much. I have had a great life, I've been in history, I've written history, and I'll move on to whatever would come next. Obviously, the Navy had a different plan. And, you know, my family, we've been blessed by all of that. The other thing I'd say, as someone of age, which I am, obviously, you can do the math pretty quickly. And this gets back to things that you do now that you don't think about in the future. At this point in my life, there are only three things that matter: my faith, my family, and my friends. And I keep those in front of me, and actually have had those in front of me my whole life. But here and now, they matter more than anything. And so protect them, focus on them, cherish them, because at this point, it's almost the only thing that matters. Actually, it is the only thing that matters.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for your service.
We have time for one final question tonight. From Shelby Langston, Cadet First Lieutenant, Air Force ROTC at Ohio State University. Given the conference's focus on organizational culture and the behaviors you previously mentioned as intolerable, what do you believe is the best way to combat an organization's culture that does tolerate behaviors such as sexism, racism, and homophobia without upsetting the command structure?
Well, you may have to upset the command structure. It's a great question. I know earlier today there were questions centering on what's the culture of the Navy, what's the culture of the Marine Corps. And I go back to the sort of the simple formula that I put up. I think it is really the combined culture, the culture of the organization, the Navy, let's say, is really the combined culture of the behaviors of the individuals and the institutions in it. It's very difficult to just sort of, you know, create a one-liner that says, here's the culture of the Navy. It's a great outfit. They're great people. It's a great mission. I've loved it my whole life. And in that regard, the culture's been incredibly positive. Have we had some really down times? I've talked about those. Do we have some bad actors? Absolutely. But I don't think the bad actors are the dominant actors. If you are in a unit, a squadron, a ship that tolerates those things, you're in trouble. That unit's in trouble, particularly if the commander is at the core of that. And if you know that for a young officer, for anybody, but particularly a young officer, to call out a commander in that regard is extremely difficult, but needs to be done if no one else will do that. And usually if you're looking at a behavior, it goes back to having that unauthorized liquid in my locker. That wasn't the first time I'd ever done anything against the conduct system. You know, that's when it was sort of the tip of the iceberg, if you will. When you see that kind of behavior in a unit, you know, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg. It's been going on a long time, and it runs pretty deep. So it's got to be stopped. Even at, and I would argue back to sort of the stain on your soul kind of thing, even at the expense of your career, to do the right thing, for which you will be remembered forever.
Thank you, sir. Sir, it is a privilege to have you here on the yard, even if it is virtually. A sincere thank you from the Brigade of Midshipmen and the conference staff. Your years of experience and considerable insight on leadership is an apt reminder of the profession of arms that we are about to join and the expectations of us as future leaders of sailors and Marines. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to present you with this gift.
What is it? I can't see it. Midshipman pack, and I wish you the best of luck with your conference, and I hope the lessons all get learned exceptionally well.
Thank you, sir. Stand by for the departure of the official party. Attention on deck. Tune into the leadership conference this week. Have a good night, Brigade.